Try to imagine if we were starting again right now, if we could go into a conversation with a brand new organisation and have the discussion about what is it that organisation needs and what is the best way to meet that need without assuming that it's a board. We'll be measuring our boards against a completely different set of metrics and ones that they could actually be more likely to be able to hit successfully. What we can learn as governors and as people engaged in arts governance from children's playground designers. Apparently that design methodology went through a similar revolution several years ago where they stopped thinking about how could we make this swing more accessible, or how could we make this play space attractive to a more diverse, how can this slide work better for more people? And started asking about how can we create the better conditions for play without going in with preconceived idea that that equals a slide and a swing. For us, their provocation was how can we create better conditions for governance without assuming that we know what it looks like. So not the tweaking that we've just been seeing, not trying to squish ourselves into models that don't really fit and possibly we're never going to fit, but allowing ourselves to ask really big foundational questions and address this, take a really different approach at a systems level, thinking different systems for who makes the decisions, which decisions we need other people to make, who they're reporting, who they're answerable to when they're making those decisions. Is it the funders or is it the constituents? Who we're ultimately accountable to, and how we can be better and more effective allies and supporters of the organisations that we love. So we've got the super board, the macro model, one board to rule them all, reducing, streamlining resources, reducing duplication. A lot of our orgs are doing the same thing. Is there a way that we can streamline that into some kind of super structure, whilst acknowledging that does put a lot more power into the hands of a lot fewer people. The opposite is the model that Act Theatre almost but didn't quite implement, the minimally viable board, so working out what the bare minimum is that legislatively or any compliance-wise that we need to tick off, and what's the minimum amount of engagement required to be able to do that in order to free up resources to meet those other ambitions in different ways. The Brains Trust model is something we're all more familiar with, so it's an ongoing advisory group model. Lots of us have this within our existing governance, so whether it's artistic advice, whether it's audience constituency representation, whether it's specific skills or, Nick, as you were saying, specific purpose, time, limited advice around specific initiatives, that kind of bringing Brains Trusts in as and when we need them, which again could just be a single group or different groups at different times. Specific action boards. So this goes back to the model we were talking about earlier about the American model of fundraising boards. So not necessarily having boards where you have to buy yourself onto it, but boards and groups that are convened for a very specific purpose. And so it's impossible for those board members to be unclear about what that purpose is, and so you recruit specifically skills with people with interest and skills in that area. Board mentors is that model I talked about earlier that potentially could help address the disparity between the number of board members versus the number of staff members. So everybody gets their own board member. It's a one-on-one, or every team gets their own board member. Again, narrowing the expertise. Some of these are getting into the silly, but we don't know what might work yet. New office holders. So we, again, have learned Robert's Rules of Order to structure our organisations along very specific lines: chair, deputy chair, treasurer, secretary. As we've talked about, only one is required according to legislation, and then none of secretary for companies and public officer for associations. So that means chair, all of those other things are optional and can be reinvented. Paid boards or paid executive chairs is a particularly controversial model that keeps getting brought up and knocked down in different ways. Especially in the small and medium sector, it feels very controversial to invest more into what should be technically voluntary roles according to our legislation when we know that we're underpaying our teams. So there's that resentment. Also, we know that the teams are the experts, and then we invest more money in the not experts. There's controversy around that. There's also controversy when you start paying people, can only the organisations that can afford it get the people that they need. The paid professional services or outsourced model. So actually, we already do this to a degree. So we already outsource our financial compliance through the annual payment of auditors. Professional secretarial services also exist. So could we outsource all of it, some of it? Which bits could we outsource, which bits would be appropriate, which bit wouldn't? Paid cultural knowledge hubs, because the appetite's changed, the zeitgeist around diversity and representation has changed. A lot of organisations have realised what a deficit they've been in terms of representation on their boards, and they're trying to make up for lost time. I was just talking to arts strategist Pippa Bailey, and she's done some really interesting work about three-way leadership models. But she says our current board hierarchy is based on industrial, patriarchal and military structures, imported from overseas and as an act of ongoing colonisation. Its focus is on efficiency, productivity, competition and chains of command, which is part of that growth agenda that doesn't value artists' labour or artistic practices. What could it look like if we invert that entirely? What could it look like in a post-colonial, post-patriarchal space that embeds access and that embeds equity and embeds anti-racism and anti-ableism, anti-oppression within the model, as opposed to reinforcing all of those things?